In this tutorial, we're creating a kind of a grungy, textured look, distressed or degraded. Essentially, we want to punch bits out of these letters and make holes in them. As you can see, this is still editable text, meaning when I click on it with the selection tool, it's underlined in blue, meaning that if I was to double click, I would still be able to edit this text just like a word processor. But to do really any of the effects that we're going to talk about, the first step will be, once you're happy with the layout of your text, just using the regular text tool, text options up here in the character menu, you will need to convert the text into vector objects. And so good practice when you're doing this is just to make a copy of it and just pop it somewhere else, just pop it off the artboard. That way, if you do mess up and you do something to the text that you're not happy with, you've always got an editable version that you can come back to and repeat your steps. So I'm going to select the text and right click on it and create outlines, and of course that will create vector versions of these letters. It's no longer editable, and in the layers panel we can see that we have actually two objects. We have the editable text just off screen up here off the artboard, and we have this group of objects, and if we were to expand that group we can see that each letter is its own object, but by default Illustrator will group these together. So the first place to start, or really the easiest way of doing it, would be to look online. So I'm in Chrome here, and I've typed in distressed texture, and I'm just going to look for examples. Another good tip actually is to go to the tools in Google and tell it that you want only large images, so that we've got good large images to work with, which will improve the quality of the finished product. And we're looking for a kind of a pattern texture which is going to work well with what we're doing. This could be a good one here. I like this one because it's sort of scratchy as well as speckled. In fact, I'm not going to use that one because it will have this text down here at the bottom, which will just be a little bit of a pain to deal with. Maybe this one. That one should work well. And it's a nice large image, 1300 by 758 pixels. So I can just simply right click on it, copy image, come back to Illustrator and paste. And so it's pasted this image into our document. In the layers panel you can see that we now have three items, three objects, and this is the one that's on top, the one that we've just pasted in. If I zoom in on this object, of course, because it's an image that's come from the internet, this is a bitmap image made up of pixels, and so if I zoom in, you can see that it's actually comprised of pixels, but we don't want that because we're designing a vector. So we need to find a way of converting this into a vector object. So I'm just going to zoom out a little bit, Control and minus, so that we can see how big this image is. Of course, the image doesn't need to be that big. I can hold down Shift, always hold down Shift when you're resizing, and make it the kind of, that's the kind of size that it will need to be to cover the text. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull this off the artboard for a moment. I don't want to confuse it with the text, and I want to be able to work on it separately. To convert a bitmap image in Illustrator into a vector, all we need to do is click on it and we will automatically get the option to image trace. So I'm going to do that now and we'll see what happens. What Illustrator is doing now is it's looking at that image and it's trying to work out the difference between black and white parts of the object, and it's given us a vector version of it. But as you'll see if I zoom in, it's not very good. How do we make it better? So by making sure that we're selected, we can go up here to the image tracing options, this panel here. So if I click on this, this panel will open up and it will give us some freedom to change the way that it's tracing the object. My recommendation is that you turn the paths up high. That will give us a more complex vector object or set of vector objects. turn the corners down low. That will give us a more organic, less angular range of vectors. And finally, turn the noise right down to something like 2 or 3 pixels. And essentially that will mean that it just picks up smaller objects as vector shapes. So we'll end up with something that looks like that, which is much closer to the original. So I can close that down now. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit again, Control and minus. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do, and you'll see why I'm doing this in a moment, is I'm going to lock this object. I don't want anything to happen to this one while I'm editing this. So I'm going to lock my text. It's no longer selectable. And I'm going to come back to this one. And because I'm happy now with the way that Illustrator has traced this, I can click on expand. Think of expand as confirm. Basically, Illustrator is just saying, okay, have you finished previewing this? Can I finalize this and turn it into vectors? So I'm going to click on expand. And it will now turn blue because what's happened is, because it's selected, each one of the tiny objects making up this vector is now surrounded by a highlighted blue outline. And we have this as a group. And I'm going to ungroup this into its maybe thousands of component parts. And finally, I need to get rid of the white. So the easiest way of doing this, and you'll see why I've locked the text now, is I'm going to go to my magic wand, click on an area of this which is white. That will select everything in the document which is white. Press backspace, and I'll be left with this. So this is just the black splodges from the vector object. And what I can now do is group those together by selecting the whole area and then hitting Control and G to group. So we now have a grouped texture object. I'm going to bring that back over the top of the text now and place it into a position that suits the text. Remember, we're trying to find a compromise between textured, grunge kind of distressed look, but also readability. We don't want the letters to be unreadable. So I'm just going to adjust it until it feels right. Let's have a look at that. Maybe not enough grunge in that one. I'm going to move this down. There's quite a lot up here at the top. Try that. Okay, yeah, that'll do. So at the moment, let's have a look at what we've got. We've got, let's ignore this one. This is just the text that we copied. We now have the group of letters here, and on top of that we have these textured objects. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn both of these groups of objects into what we call compound paths. What that means is that Illustrator will no longer see them as a group of objects, it will see them as one very complex path. So selecting this one first, I'm going to go to Object, Compound Path, and Make. Let's just, it will by default, when you make a compound path, take away the color and the outline. So I'm going to go back and make it white. And then for the other group, I'm going to do the same thing. Object, compound path, and make. It's left it black, which is good. And now, what I'm essentially wanting to do is take these top vectors and punch those shapes out of the shapes that are underneath them. So I'm going to select both of these compound paths like that, and I'm going to go to a panel called Pathfinder. This is the Pathfinder panel, which is for merging or subtracting objects from one another. This is the one that I'm going to be using, minus front, so back object minus the front. Click here, and what we should now see is that it has, wherever there's overlap between the two objects, it has removed that part of the object. And if I zoom in now, you can see that what was solid letters is now broken up by these grungy objects. I'm just going to save that. I would advise you, I'm going to be saying this a lot, I'm just going to keep reminding you that you need to save your work a lot. The remote system is not the most stable. Okay. So our grungy letters, if I was to choose this object, I could now make this a different color. And of course we'd still have that degraded kind of textured look. And as well, I could, if I was to place a color behind it, let's just draw a red rectangle, for instance, to go behind it. Make this red, and in the layers panel, drag this new red object underneath these letters. We would get something that looked like that. So we now have a vector distressed version of the lettering, which we can do all sorts of things with to use in our ident and other bits of media that we're creating for these adverts. And I'll see you in the next tutorial, where we will be talking about another one of the series of effects that we can apply to text. See you later.